On a grey and motionless afternoon, an elderly woman pushes a baby stroller through quiet streets, surrounded by the scent of fresh bread and clothesline sounds. As she passes behind a market, the baby starts pointing to a narrow alley, gesturing more and more urgently. The woman follows her grandson's gaze and stops at a harsh sight: a German shepherd hanging from a wall hook, body slumped, eyes fixed. She tries to reach the rope but fails. The baby begins to cry loudly. A market worker hears it, runs over, grabs a box and pliers and cuts the rope. The dog collapses. The baby touches its snout. And what happens next, no one is ready to see. Love animal stories? Then subscribe now and never miss one. Thanks for being with us. Now, back to our story. In the sleepy town of Maplewood, Massachusetts, where time seemed to move at its own gentle pace, Martha Wilson had established a rhythm to her days that brought comfort in their predictability. At 67, with silver hair always neatly pinned back and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled, Martha had embraced her role as grandmother with the same quiet dedication she had given to everything else in her life. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, while her daughter Ellie worked the early shift at Maplewood Memorial Hospital, Martha would care for her 15-month-old grandson, Ethan. These mornings had a routine that felt almost sacred to Martha. She would wake before dawn, prepare a simple breakfast of oatmeal with cinnamon, and wait for Ellie to drop off Ethan on her way to work. Then, after the little boy had played and napped, Martha would bundle him into his stroller for their regular walk through the neighborhood. Their route never varied: down Elm Street, past the community garden, and through the small commercial district with its family-owned businesses that had stood for generations. On this particular Thursday in early October, the morning had unfolded like so many before it. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from early lit fireplaces. Martha pushed Ethan's stroller with practiced ease, occasionally pointing out squirrels or brightly colored leaves to the delighted toddler. His chubby fingers would reach out, grasping at the air as he babbled in response to her gentle narration of their surroundings. "Look, Ethan, Mrs. Peterson has put out her Halloween decorations already," Martha commented as they passed a yard, festooned with friendly-looking ghosts and smiling pumpkins. Ethan clapped his hands, his blue eyes wide with wonder at the sight. They continued their leisurely pace until they reached Sullivan's Market, a cornerstone of the community for over 40 years. Martha often stopped here on their walks to pick up a few groceries or exchange pleasantries with Tom Sullivan, whose father had opened the store before Tom was even born. Today, however, she had no plans to go inside. They were simply passing by, as they always did. But something was different. Just as they approached the alleyway that ran alongside the market, Ethan's demeanor changed abruptly. The contented babbling ceased, replaced by an unusual restlessness. At first, Martha thought he might be uncomfortable or hungry, but his behavior wasn't typical of either state. He began to fidget in his seat, straining against the straps that kept him secure in the stroller. "What is it, sweetie?" Martha asked, leaning forward to check if something was pinching him or if his clothing had bunched uncomfortably. Ethan didn't respond with words. At 15 months, his vocabulary was still limited to a handful of simple terms. But his little arm extended, finger pointing insistently toward the narrow alley beside Sullivan's Market. His face had taken on an expression of concern that seemed far too mature for his age. His brow furrowed in a way that reminded Martha painfully of his grandfather, her late husband, Robert. "You want to look down there?" Martha asked, puzzled by his sudden interest in the shadowy passage between buildings. It wasn't like Ethan to be so adamant about anything, especially not during their peaceful morning walks. The toddler continued to gesture, his movements becoming more agitated with each passing second. When Martha hesitated, Ethan let out a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a cry, not one of his usual vocalizations, but something that conveyed a surprising urgency. Martha had lived long enough to trust her instincts, and something about Ethan's behavior stirred a sense of unease within her. With a cautious glance around, she guided the stroller closer to the alley entrance, still maintaining a safe distance from whatever might be lurking in the shadows. That's when she heard it. A sound so faint she might have missed it entirely, if not for Ethan's persistence. A strained, wheezing breath, followed by the softest whimper. Something or someone was in distress. "Hello?" Martha called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" No human response came, but the whimpering grew slightly louder, as if whatever was making the sound had been given hope by her voice. Martha took a cautious step forward, pushing the stroller just a little further into the alley entrance, where the morning light still reached. What she saw made her heart constrict painfully in her chest. Partially hidden behind a stack of empty produce crates was a large German shepherd, hanging by a rope tied around its neck from a hook high on the market's brick wall. The dog's paws barely scraped the ground, taking just enough weight off its neck to prevent immediate suffocation, but not enough to provide relief. Its once powerful body was now limp with exhaustion, and its eyes, amber-brown and filled with a desperate intelligence, locked onto Martha's with a silent plea that needed no translation. "Oh my God," Martha whispered, instinctively placing a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder. The little boy had gone quiet now, but his gaze was fixed on the struggling animal with an intensity that was unsettling in one so young. For a brief moment, Martha considered turning away, calling for help from inside the market, or even continuing their walk and phoning animal control once they returned home. The situation was dangerous. The dog was large, possibly injured, and certainly frightened. But something in those intelligent eyes and something in the way Ethan had so insistently drawn her attention to the animal's plight made it impossible for her to walk away. Martha looked around frantically, assessing her options. She was not tall enough to reach the hook, and even if she could, her arthritis would make it difficult to support the weight of such a large dog. The rope was tied too tightly for her to loosen, and she had nothing with her that could cut through the thick material. "Hang on," she told the dog, the absurdity of her choice of words hitting her only after they'd left her mouth. "I'm going to get help." Just as she was about to wheel Ethan back toward the market's entrance, the service door to the alley swung open with a metallic groan. A young man in a green Sullivan's Market apron emerged, carrying a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. He was tall and lanky, with dark hair tucked under a baseball cap, and couldn't have been more than 20 years old. "Jake," Martha called out, recognizing Tom Sullivan's nephew, who had started working at the market during his summer break from college and had stayed on part-time while attending the local community college. Jake turned, his expression shifting from surprise to horror as he registered the scene before him. The flattened boxes tumbled from his arms, forgotten. "Mrs. Wilson, what?" His eyes widened as they landed on the suspended dog. "Holy geez, what happened?" "I don't know," Martha replied, her voice shaking slightly. "Ethan noticed something was wrong. The poor thing is hanging there, Jake. We need to get it down right away." Without hesitation, Jake nodded. "Stay with the little guy. I'll be right back." He disappeared back into the store, returning moments later with a wooden crate and what appeared to be heavy-duty wire cutters. His movements were quick but deliberate as he positioned the crate beneath the struggling dog, then climbed up onto the makeshift platform. "Easy, buddy," Jake murmured to the German shepherd, who watched him with wary but hopeful eyes. "I'm gonna help you. Just hold on a little longer." Martha found herself holding her breath as Jake stretched upward, the wire cutters poised to sever the rope. Ethan remained unusually still and quiet in his stroller, his small features set in an expression of solemn concentration. With a grunt of effort, Jake closed the blades of the wire cutters on the taut rope. There was a moment of resistance, and then the fibers gave way with a sharp snap. The German Shepherd dropped heavily, its legs buckling as they took on the full weight of its body for the first time in what might have been hours. Jake jumped down from the crate and knelt beside the fallen animal, his hands hovering uncertainly over its heaving sides. He's alive, but he doesn't look good. That rope did a number on his neck. Martha cautiously approached, keeping Ethan's stroller at a safe distance. The German Shepherd lay on its side, its breathing labored but steady. Despite its weakened state, there was a nobility to the animal that tugged at Martha's heart. Its coat, though dirty and matted in places, was predominantly black, with rich tan markings on its face, chest, and legs, the classic coloration of its breed. "We need to get him to a vet," Martha said firmly, her initial shock giving way to determination. "There's Dr. Mercer's clinic just 3 blocks from here." Jake nodded, already pulling out his cell phone. "I'll call ahead and let them know we're coming. Tom will understand if I need to step out for this." As Jake made the call, Martha knelt carefully beside the German Shepherd, maintaining enough distance to react if the injured animal lashed out. But the dog showed no signs of aggression. Instead, it turned its head slightly, its gaze moving from Martha to the stroller where Ethan sat watching. Something passed between the toddler and the dog, a moment of connection that Martha couldn't explain, but nevertheless witnessed with absolute clarity. Ethan extended his small hand toward the German Shepherd in a gesture that seemed impossibly gentle and deliberate for a child his age. The dog, with what appeared to be tremendous effort, lifted its muzzle just enough to acknowledge the child's presence. In that moment, as sunlight filtered through the alley and cast long shadows across the pavement, Martha Wilson had the strangest sensation that she was witnessing not just a rescue, but the beginning of something profound, something that would alter the course of their quiet, predictable lives in ways she could not yet imagine. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was just how right she was. Getting the injured German Shepherd to Dr. Mercer's veterinary clinic proved to be no small challenge. The dog, though severely weakened, was still a substantial weight, easily 80 pounds or more. Jake, despite his lanky frame, had surprising strength, but even he struggled to lift the animal without causing further distress. Finally, they settled on using a flattened cardboard box as a makeshift stretcher, with Jake supporting most of the weight while Martha guided them, pushing Ethan's stroller ahead to clear a path. "The clinic said they'll be ready for us," Jake informed Martha as they began their slow procession down the sidewalk. "Dr. Mercer is with another patient, but his assistant will take him right in." The 3 blocks to Maplewood Veterinary Clinic felt much longer than usual. Every few steps, Martha would glance back at the German Shepherd, whose eyes remained open but unfocused, its breathing still labored. Occasionally, those intelligent eyes would drift toward Ethan's stroller, as if the dog was checking that the child was still there. For his part, Ethan maintained an unusual quiet, twisting in his seat to keep the dog in his line of sight. Once or twice, he made soft cooing sounds that Martha had never heard from him before, not directed at his stuffed animals, not at the neighborhood cats, not even at the golden retriever puppy that Ellie's friend had brought over last month. Almost. "And there," Martha encouraged, as much for herself as for Jake and the injured animal, "just around this corner." Maplewood Veterinary Clinic occupied a converted Victorian house on Maple Street, its white clapboard exterior and green shutters making it look more like a family home than a medical facility. As they approached, the front door swung open and a woman in blue scrubs rushed out to meet them. "Rebecca," Martha acknowledged the veterinary technician with relief. "Thank you for being ready." "Let's get him inside," Rebecca directed, her professional demeanor taking over as she assessed the German Shepherd's condition with a quick glance. "Exam room 2 is prepped." Jake maneuvered the makeshift stretcher through the door, with Rebecca's help disappearing into the clinic. Martha followed with Ethan, the familiar antiseptic smell of the veterinary office mingling with the scents of pet food and the faint musk of animal fur. The waiting room was mercifully empty, save for an elderly man cradling a cat carrier on his lap who looked up with concern as they passed. "Martha, you can wait here with Ethan," Rebecca suggested, gesturing to the seating area. "We'll take good care of the dog." But before Martha could agree, Ethan let out a distressed cry, his small hands reaching toward the hallway where Jake and Rebecca had taken the German Shepherd. It was the first sound he'd made since they'd left the alley, and it carried such unmistakable anxiety that Martha found herself shaking her head. "Actually, if it's possible, I think Ethan needs to see that the dog is okay," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "He's the one who found him in a way. He's been unusually attached." Rebecca hesitated, clearly weighing clinic protocol against the palpable distress of the toddler. "All right," she conceded after a moment, "but please stay by the door. Dr. Mercer will need space to work once he's finished with his current patient." Martha nodded gratefully, wheeling Ethan's stroller to the entrance of exam room 2. Inside, Jake was carefully transferring the German Shepherd from the cardboard onto the stainless steel examination table while Rebecca quickly gathered supplies. The dog lay still, save for the rise and fall of its ribcage, its eyes now closed as if the last reserves of its strength had been depleted. "Poor thing," Martha murmured, instinctively placing a comforting hand on Ethan's head. The toddler had gone quiet again, but his gaze remained fixed on the German Shepherd with an intensity that was almost unsettling in one so young. Rebecca worked efficiently, cutting away the remaining rope from around the dog's neck to reveal raw, chafed skin beneath. She applied a gentle antiseptic wash, speaking softly to the animal as she worked. "You're safe now, big guy. We're going to take good care of you." The examination room door opened, and Dr. Mercer entered. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper, hair and glasses that couldn't quite hide the compassionate fatigue in his eyes. He nodded to Martha briefly before turning his full attention to his patient. "What do we have here, Rebecca?" he asked, pulling on a fresh pair of latex gloves. "Male, German Shepherd, approximately 3 to 4 years old based on dentition," Rebecca reported professionally. "Found hanging by a rope in the alley beside Sullivan's Market. Severe rope burns around the neck, dehydration, possible tracheal damage, and signs of previous neglect including malnutrition and untreated ear infection." Dr. Mercer's expression darkened as he began his examination, his hands moving gently but methodically over the dog's body. "No collar, I assume? Microchip?" "We haven't scanned yet," Rebecca admitted. "We were focusing on stabilizing him first." "Let's do that now," Dr. Mercer decided, reaching for the microchip scanner. He passed the handheld device over the dog's shoulder blades, then down his back and around the neck area. After a moment, he shook his head. "No chip. Not surprising given the circumstances." He continued his examination, checking the dog's ears, eyes, and teeth before listening to his heart and lungs with a stethoscope. Finally, he gently palpated the German Shepherd's abdomen, eliciting a soft whimper from the animal. "He's in rough shape," Dr. Mercer concluded, straightening up. "But he's young and strong underneath it all. The neck injuries are concerning. There's significant trauma to the soft tissues, and I want to check for any damage to the trachea or cervical vertebrae. I'd like to sedate him for a more thorough examination and to clean and treat those wounds properly." Martha found herself nodding. though she wasn't sure why her approval would matter. She wasn't the dog's owner. No one was, apparently. Yet somehow, in the short time since Ethan had drawn her attention to the animal in distress, she felt a responsibility toward him that she couldn't easily explain. "Will he be okay?" she asked quietly. Dr. Mercer turned to her with a measured gaze. "He's stable for now, and I don't see any immediately life-threatening injuries. But he's been through a significant trauma, both physical and psychological. Recovery won't be quick or simple." "What happens to him after you've treated him?" Martha found herself asking. "If there's no owner to contact?" "Normally, we'd alert animal control and he'd go to the county shelter once he's stable enough," Dr. Mercer explained. "They'd hold him for the required period in case anyone claims him, though." His voice trailed off, the implication clear. Anyone who would hang a dog by the neck was unlikely to come forward to claim it. "And after that?" Martha pressed, though she already knew the answer. Dr. Mercer sighed, removing his glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose. "The county shelter does its best, but they're always overcrowded. Large dogs, especially ones with trauma histories, don't always find homes quickly. And with his medical needs..." The unspoken outcome hung in the air, making the antiseptic smell of the exam room suddenly seem more oppressive. Martha looked down at Ethan, who remained transfixed by the German Shepherd on the table. As if sensing her gaze, the toddler looked up at her, his blue eyes wide and somehow pleading. "What if?" Martha began, then stopped, surprised by the words forming in her mind. "What if I took him? Just temporarily, of course, while you treat him and we look for a proper home." Jake, who had been standing quietly by the wall, straightened in surprise. "Mrs. Wilson, are you sure? He's a big dog, and after what he's been through..." "I know it sounds impulsive," Martha admitted, "but Ethan found him for a reason, and I have that fenced backyard and Robert's workshop that I never use. It would make a decent shelter until we find something more permanent." The words were coming faster now, as if the idea, once voiced, had taken on a momentum of its own. Dr. Mercer studied her thoughtfully. "It would be better than the shelter, certainly. But Martha, this isn't a decision to take lightly. This dog will need medical follow-up, possibly behavioral support, and he's going to be frightened and disoriented for some time." "I understand," Martha said, with more confidence than she felt. "But I can't bear the thought of him going to a shelter after what he's already been through. Not when we have the space and ability to help. Just until a permanent solution is found." Dr. Mercer exchanged a glance with Rebecca, who gave a small shrug of approval. "All right," he conceded. "Let's focus on treating him first. We'll need to sedate him, clean those wounds properly, run some tests, and get some fluids and nutrition into him. If all goes well, and if you're still certain after you've had time to think it through, we can discuss discharge plans tomorrow or the day after." Martha nodded, feeling both relief and a flutter of anxiety at what she had just volunteered for. She looked down at Ethan again, who had relaxed visibly, as if he understood that the German Shepherd would be coming home with them. "Does he have a name?" Jake asked suddenly. "I mean, I know he's not yours, but it feels weird to keep calling him the dog or the German Shepherd." Martha hesitated, looking at the injured animal on the table. Despite his condition, there was a dignity to him, a resilience that had allowed him to survive when many others might have given up. The name came to her suddenly, with a certainty that felt almost like memory. "Ranger," she said softly. "His name is Ranger." As if in response to the name, the German Shepherd's eyes fluttered open briefly, his gaze finding Ethan's before drifting closed again. In that fleeting moment of connection, Martha felt a shiver of something inexplicable pass through the room. Not foreboding exactly, but a sense that their lives had just changed course in ways she could not yet comprehend. What had begun as a routine morning walk had somehow led them here, to this examination room, to this wounded animal, to this unexpected decision. Martha didn't consider herself impulsive. At 67, she valued the predictable rhythms of her life, the comfortable routines that had sustained her through widowhood and the gentle transition into grandmotherhood. And yet, here she was, upending that carefully constructed stability for the sake of a dog she'd known for less than an hour, a dog that, by all rights, should have inspired caution rather than commitment. But when she looked at Ethan, so unusually focused on the injured animal, and when she recalled the way Ranger had used his last reserves of strength to acknowledge the toddler's presence, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't mere coincidence. It was as if Ethan had somehow known, as if some primal instinct had guided him to notice what adults would have missed, to insist on investigation when others might have continued their peaceful walk. And now, watching her grandson's solemn vigil over the sedated German shepherd, Martha wondered if perhaps children possessed a wisdom that adults, in their practiced rationality, had forgotten how to access. "We should let Dr. Mercer work now," she said gently to Ethan, preparing to wheel his stroller back to the waiting room. "Ranger is going to sleep for a while, so the doctor can make him feel better." Ethan didn't protest, but as Martha turned the stroller toward the door, he twisted in his seat to maintain visual contact with Ranger for as long as possible. Only when the door closed behind them did he finally face forward again, his small features set in an expression of what Martha could only describe as determined patience. Ellie Wilson's reaction to her mother's impulsive decision was precisely what Martha had expected, a mixture of disbelief, concern, and cautious support. "Mom, are you serious? A German shepherd that you found hanging in an alley?" Ellie's voice carried the particular tone of exasperation that only adult children can perfect when addressing their parents' unexpected choices. At 34, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and still dressed in her hospital scrubs, she looked remarkably like Martha had at the same age, except for the eyes, which were all Robert's. They were standing in Martha's kitchen, where the evening light filtered through lace curtains that had hung in the same windows for over 20 years. Ethan was asleep in the portable crib in the living room, exhausted from the day's events. "I know how it sounds," Martha admitted, placing a mug of tea in front of her daughter. "But you should have seen him, Ellie, and the way Ethan responded. To him, it wasn't normal. It was like he knew the dog needed help." Ellie sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Children are sensitive, Mom, and Ethan's always been particularly attuned to his surroundings. But that doesn't mean you need to bring home a traumatized animal. Have you really thought this through? The responsibility, the potential risks?" "It's temporary," Martha insisted, though even to her own ears, the qualifier sounded less convincing than it had in Dr. Mercer's office. "Just until he's recovered and we can find him a good home. Dr. Mercer said he should be ready to leave the clinic in a couple of days, provided his tests come back clear." "And what about when I bring Ethan over for you to watch him? A dog that's been abused could be unpredictable, especially around a toddler." Martha thought back to the moment in the alley when Ranger, despite his suffering, had seemed to find some small reserve of strength at the sight of Ethan, and later in the exam room, how the child and dog had maintained that inexplicable connection even as Ranger drifted under sedation. "Dr. Mercer says we'll take it slowly," she explained. "Ranger will stay in the converted workshop at first, with supervised interactions. We'll follow whatever guidelines the clinic recommends for his rehabilitation." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Ranger? You've named him already?" Martha felt a flush of self-consciousness. It just seemed to fit him. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Ellie's expression softened. "You miss having something to care for, don't you? Since Dad..." The sentence hung unfinished, as so many did when they approached the subject of Robert's absence. 5 years had passed since the stroke that took him, but sometimes Martha still reached across the bed in the middle of the night, momentarily forgetting that the space beside her was empty. "This isn't about that," Martha protested, though perhaps not as firmly as she might have. "It's about doing the right thing for an animal that deserves a second chance." Ellie studied her mother's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful. And if it doesn't work out, if Ranger shows any signs of aggression, or if the responsibility becomes too much, you'll let Dr. Mercer find another solution." "I promise," Martha agreed, relief washing over her. She hadn't realized how important her daughter's approval was until she'd secured it. Ellie glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should get Ethan home. It's past his bedtime and I have an early shift tomorrow." "He's already asleep," Martha pointed out. "Why don't you leave him here tonight? You can pick up a fresh uniform from your place and come back for him in the morning. That way you won't have to wake him up and get him settled again at home." It was a reasonable suggestion, one they'd implemented on several occasions when Ellie's work schedule demanded flexibility. Still, Martha felt an unusual urgency behind the offer tonight, a need to keep Ethan close that she couldn't entirely explain. After a moment's consideration, Ellie nodded. "That does make sense. Just let me grab his diaper bag from the car." Later, after Ellie had gone and the house had settled into nighttime stillness, Martha found herself standing at the window, looking out toward Robert's old workshop. The small building sat at the far end of the backyard, a simple structure of weathered wood that had once housed her husband's woodworking projects. Since his passing, it had served mainly as storage, collecting garden tools and holiday decorations, rather than the lovingly crafted furniture that had once emerged from it. Now it would become Ranger's temporary home, a safe space where he could heal and adjust without the pressures of immediate integration into the household. Tomorrow, she would begin clearing it out, making room for the dog bed and supplies that Dr. Mercer had recommended. With a sigh, Martha turned from the window and moved quietly to the living room, where Ethan slept peacefully in his portable crib. In sleep, his features relaxed into an expression of pure innocence, his long eyelashes casting faint shadows on his rounded cheeks. Martha reached down to adjust his blanket, her heart swelling with the fierce protective love that only grandparents and parents truly understand. "What did you see today, little one?" she whispered. "What did you know that the rest of us didn't?" Ethan stirred slightly, but didn't wake, his small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. Martha watched him for a moment longer, then retreated to her own bedroom, wondering what the coming days would bring. The next morning, after Ellie had collected Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and lingering concern, Martha set to work on the workshop. It was a beautiful fall day, the kind that seemed designed to make New Englanders forget the harsh winters that inevitably followed. Sunlight dappled the yard through the branches of the old maple tree, its leaves now a brilliant tapestry of red and gold. Martha worked methodically, sorting through years of accumulated items. Some were practical, garden tools, paint cans, extension cords, while others were laden with memory. Robert's workbench with its precisely arranged tools, the half-finished birdhouse he'd been working on when he fell ill, the carved wooden toys he'd made for Ethan before he was even born. These she handled with particular care, setting them aside to be preserved rather than discarded. The rest she organized into piles: keep, donate, dispose. By noon, she had cleared enough space for a decent-sized dog bed, food and water stations, and the crate that Dr. Mercer had recommended for Ranger's initial adjustment period. After a quick lunch and a phone call to check on Ranger's progress at the clinic, stable, responding well to treatment, but still sedated for comfort, Martha drove to Pet Palace, the locally owned pet supply store on Main Street. She'd made a list based on Dr. Mercer's recommendations: an orthopedic dog bed for Ranger's recovery, a sturdy crate large enough for him to stand and turn around comfortably, stainless steel food and water bowls, high-quality dog food formulated for recovery and weight gain, and a few basic toys. "Starting fresh with a new dog?" asked the cheerful young woman at the register as she rang up Martha's substantial purchase. "Something like that," Martha replied, not quite ready to share Ranger's full story with a stranger. "He's had a rough time, so we're trying to make things comfortable for him." The young woman nodded approvingly. "That's so kind of you. Too many people give up on dogs when they've had trauma or behavioral issues. They just need patience and the right environment to thrive." Martha smiled politely, though the words stirred a flutter of anxiety in her chest. What if she couldn't provide that environment? What if, despite her best intentions, she wasn't equipped to help Ranger overcome his past? She was, after all, a 67-year-old widow, not a professional animal rehabilitator. These doubts followed her home, hovering like shadows as she set up the workshop space according to Dr. Mercer's instructions. The crate went in one corner, positioned so that Ranger would be able to see the door but wouldn't feel exposed. The dog bed was placed nearby but outside the crate, giving him options. Food and water stations were set up away from his resting areas, and a few soft toys, nothing that squeaked as Dr. Mercer had warned that might trigger fear, were scattered about for environmental enrichment. By late afternoon, the transformation was complete. The workshop, once a chaotic repository of the past, had become a clean, organized space designed for healing and new beginnings. Martha stood in the doorway, surveying her work with a mixture of satisfaction and trepidation. Tomorrow, if all went well, Ranger would come home. That evening, as she prepared a simple dinner for herself, the phone rang. It was Dr. Mercer, his voice carrying the measured tone of a medical professional delivering complicated news. "Martha, I wanted to update you on Ranger's condition before tomorrow," he began. "Physically, he's stable and improving. The neck wounds are clean and beginning to heal, and the IV fluids have addressed his dehydration. We've started him on a course of antibiotics for the ear infection and some mild anti-inflammatories for the soft tissue trauma." "That sounds positive," Martha said cautiously, detecting a but in his tone. "It is," Dr. Mercer agreed. "However, I want to prepare you for what to expect behaviorally. Ranger has experienced significant trauma, and while he's been remarkably calm here at the clinic, that could change in a new environment. He's shown no signs of aggression. Quite the opposite, actually. He's been almost unnaturally subdued, but trauma can manifest in different ways once an animal begins to feel safe enough to process what's happened to them." Martha leaned against the kitchen counter, absorbing his words. "What should I watch for?" "Hypervigilance is common. Excessive alertness, startling easily, difficulty relaxing. He might be fearful of certain objects or situations, particularly anything resembling the conditions of his trauma. Height, ropes, enclosed spaces. These could all be triggers. He might also exhibit resource guarding, separation anxiety, or fear-based defensive behaviors." The list was daunting, each potential issue more complex than the last. Martha felt her earlier doubts resurface, stronger now. "Do you think I'm making a mistake, trying to help him? Should he be with someone more experienced?" There was a pause on the line, and Martha could almost see Dr. Mercer removing his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as he had in the exam room. "I think," he said finally, that Ranger has shown remarkable resilience already, and there's something to be said for intuition, both yours and your grandson's. Sometimes the right match isn't about experience or expertise, but about connection. Martha thought of Ethan's insistence, his unusual focus on the dog, and the way Ranger had responded to him, even in his weakened state. "There is something there," she admitted. "Something I can't quite explain." "Then let's proceed as planned," Dr. Mercer decided. "We'll discharge him tomorrow afternoon. I'll provide detailed instructions for his care and medications, and we'll schedule regular follow-up appointments to monitor his progress. Rebecca has also offered to put you in touch with a trainer who specializes in rehabilitation for traumatized dogs, if you'd like that additional support." "Yes, please," Martha said, grateful for the lifeline. "I want to give him the best chance possible." After ending the call, Martha returned to her cooling dinner, her appetite diminished by the weight of responsibility she'd taken on. Yet beneath the anxiety, there was something else, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in some time. Since Robert's passing, her days had taken on a comfortable but somewhat hollow rhythm, punctuated by the joy of Ethan's visits, but otherwise marked by the kind of quiet solitude that creeps up slowly, almost unnoticed, until it becomes the dominant feature of one's existence. Now, suddenly, there was Ranger, a wounded soul who needed her in ways that were both clear and complex. It wouldn't be easy. Dr. Mercer had made that abundantly clear. But as Martha glanced out the window toward the workshop, now bathed in the golden light of sunset, she felt a curious certainty that this unexpected detour was exactly where her path was meant to lead. What she couldn't know, as she washed her dinner dishes and prepared for bed, was just how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. For the connection between Ethan and Ranger, that inexplicable recognition that had drawn the toddler's attention to the suffering animal, was only the beginning of a bond that would defy explanation and ultimately change all their lives. In ways none of them could imagine, the first week with Ranger unfolded with unexpected smoothness, defying Dr. Mercer's cautious predictions. The German Shepherd settled into the workshop space with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his traumatic experience. He was reserved but not fearful, watchful but not anxious. He accepted his medications with stoic patience and showed appropriate interest in his surroundings without becoming overwhelmed. What most surprised Martha, however, was his behavior around Ethan. Dr. Mercer had advised extreme caution with their initial interactions, brief, supervised moments with Ranger on a leash and Ethan at a safe distance. But from the first controlled meeting in the backyard, it was clear that the normal rules didn't quite apply to their unusual connection. Ranger, who maintained a respectful distance from adults, including Martha herself, displayed a different demeanor entirely around the toddler. His posture would soften, his eyes would brighten, and he would lower his head to Ethan's level in a gesture that seemed almost reverential. For his part, Ethan treated Ranger with a gentleness that was remarkable for a child his age. There were no grabbing hands or sudden movements, just patient observation and occasional soft babbling in what Martha had come to think of as Ethan's special Ranger language. By the end of the second week, Dr. Mercer had declared Ranger's physical recovery remarkable and cautiously approved longer interactions with Ethan, though still under Martha's vigilant supervision. The rope burns around the dog's neck had begun to heal, leaving patches of fur that would likely never grow back properly, but no longer required the protective collar he'd initially worn. His ear infection had cleared, and he'd gained weight steadily on the special recovery diet. "I've rarely seen an animal bounce back this quickly from such severe trauma," Dr. Mercer admitted during Ranger's follow-up appointment. "Physically, he's making excellent progress. Behaviorally, Well, he's not following the typical pattern of recovery, but I can't say that's a bad thing. He seems to have formed a strong attachment to your family, particularly to Ethan. Is that unusual? Martha asked, watching as Ranger sat calmly beside her chair in the exam room, his posture alert but relaxed. Dr. Mercer considered this, his expression thoughtful. Animals that have experienced abuse or neglect often struggle to form trusting relationships, especially initially. There's typically a period of testing boundaries, of uncertainty. Ranger seems to have skipped that stage somehow. It's as if he already knows you're safe. The observation lingered with Martha as she drove home, Ranger sitting regally in the back seat of her sedan, his gaze fixed out the window at the passing landscape. There was something almost uncanny about his composure, about the way he had slipped into their lives as if he had always belonged there. Ellie had noticed it too. After her initial skepticism, she had gradually warmed to Ranger's presence, particularly when she observed the dynamic between the German Shepherd and her son. "It's weird, Mom," she'd confessed one evening, watching from the kitchen window as Ethan sat in the grass beside Ranger, pointing at butterflies and chattering in his limited vocabulary. It's like they've known each other forever, like they have some secret language the rest of us don't understand. Martha couldn't disagree. There was something special in the way Ranger oriented himself around Ethan, not just protective, though he certainly was that, but attuned in a way that seemed to transcend normal animal behavior. He would position himself between the toddler and the street when they were in the front yard. He would watch intently when Ethan attempted new physical skills like climbing onto the couch or navigating the single porch step. And sometimes, when Ethan was napping and Ranger was nearby, the dog would lift his head suddenly, alert and focused, moments before the child woke. By the third week, Ranger had graduated from the workshop to the house proper. He still had his bed in the converted workspace, his safe place, as the trainer had called it, but he now spent most of his time wherever Ethan was, maintaining a respectful but constant presence. Martha had expected to feel some reservation about this development, some lingering concern about having a large dog with a traumatic past so close to her vulnerable grandson. Instead, she found herself increasingly comforted by Ranger's vigilant presence. There was an intelligence in those amber eyes that went beyond mere animal instinct, a thoughtfulness, an awareness that made her feel that Ethan was safer with Ranger nearby than without him. The morning that everything changed began like any other. It was a Thursday in early November, the air crisp with the promise of the coming winter. Martha had bundled Ethan into a warm jacket for their morning walk, and Ranger walked beside the stroller with the perfect heel position that the trainer had praised as exceptional, especially for a dog with no previous formal training. Their route had expanded slightly since Ranger's arrival. They still passed Sullivan's Market, though Martha deliberately avoided the alley where they'd found him. Instead, they would continue 2 blocks further to the small neighborhood park with its swings and slide that Ethan had recently become enamored with. Today, the park was empty, save for a young mother with an infant in a carrier who sat on a bench nursing a travel mug of coffee while her baby slept against her chest. Martha exchanged a polite smile with her as she helped Ethan out of his stroller and guided him toward the toddler-appropriate section of the playground. Ranger settled into a seated position near the play area, his posture relaxed but attentive, as Ethan squealed with delight at the small slide designed specifically for children his age. Martha sat on a nearby bench, close enough to intervene if needed, but giving Ethan space to explore within the safe confines of the toddler area. "Your dog is beautiful," the young mother commented, approaching Martha's bench with her sleeping infant. "German Shepherd. Yes," Martha confirmed with a smile. "His name is Ranger. He's so well behaved. We've been thinking about getting a dog when Lily gets a bit older." She nodded toward her sleeping infant. "Did you raise him from a puppy?" The question brought Martha up short. In the weeks since Ranger had come into their lives, she'd shared the bare minimum of his story with neighbors and acquaintances, usually just that he was a rescue, without elaborating on the horrific circumstances of his finding. Something about his dignity seemed to demand that discretion, as if broadcasting his trauma would somehow diminish the remarkable resilience he'd shown in overcoming it. "He's a rescue, actually," Martha said simply. "We've only had him about 3 weeks, but he's adjusted wonderfully." The young woman seemed impressed. "Wow, that's amazing. He acts like he's been with you forever." Before Martha could respond, Ranger's demeanor changed abruptly. His ears pricked forward, his body tensing as his gaze fixed on something across the park. Martha followed his line of sight to see a man standing at the park's edge, partially obscured by the trunk of a large oak tree. There was nothing immediately alarming about his appearance. He wore jeans and a dark jacket with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. But something about the way he was watching the playground area sent a prickle of unease down Martha's spine. Ranger rose to his feet, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert in an instant. He didn't growl or bark, but the sudden intensity of his focus was unmistakable. Martha instinctively looked toward Ethan, who was happily scooping sand, into a small bucket, oblivious to the tension that had entered the atmosphere. "Is something wrong?" the young mother asked, noticing the change in Ranger's behavior and Martha's expression. "I'm not sure," Martha admitted, standing up. "Ethan, sweetheart, I think it's time to go home." Ethan looked up, his face registering disappointment at the prospect of ending his play so soon. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but then his gaze shifted to Ranger, and something in the dog's stance seemed to communicate what words could not. The toddler stood without further complaint, dusting sand from his small hands. Martha moved to collect him, acutely aware of Ranger positioning himself between them and the watching stranger. As she lifted Ethan into her arms, the man stepped out from behind the tree and began walking purposefully toward them, his pace quickening with each step. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying across the small park. "Ma'am, could I ask you something?" Ranger moved forward slightly, his body language unmistakable now, protective, wary, ready. He didn't growl, but his stance made it clear that the approaching man would need to go through him to reach Martha and Ethan. The man hesitated, his gaze shifting between Ranger and Martha. There was a calculation happening behind his eyes, an assessment of risk and opportunity. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in a precarious balance. Then, with a muttered curse, he turned abruptly and walked away, his pace just shy of running as he disappeared around the corner of the street. "Should we call someone?" the young mother asked, her voice tight with concern as she held her infant closer to her chest. That seemed off. Martha's heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through her system in a way she hadn't experienced in years. "I think we should," she agreed, already reaching for her phone. That didn't feel right at all. Officer Davis arrived within minutes, his patrol car pulling up alongside the park as Martha finished recounting what had happened. He was young for a police officer, perhaps in his early 30s, with a serious demeanor that was nonetheless kind when he addressed Ethan with a gentle, "Hey there, buddy," before turning his attention to Martha. "Can you describe the man again, Mrs. Wilson?" he asked, notepad in hand. Martha provided what details she could: average height and build, dark jacket, jeans, baseball cap that shadowed his features. "I didn't get a good look at his face," she admitted, "but Ranger sensed something was wrong before I even noticed him." Officer Davis glanced at the German shepherd, who had remained alert but calm throughout the interview. Good instincts, he commented. We've had reports of a suspicious individual watching playgrounds and schoolyards in neighboring towns, possibly casing for potential. He glanced at Ethan and modified his language. For vulnerable targets. I'll increase patrols in this area and check if any of our security cameras might have caught a better image of him. He handed Martha his card. Call immediately if you see him again, and maybe vary your routine for a while. Different times, different routes. Martha nodded, clutching Ethan a little tighter. We will, thank you, officer. As they walked home, Martha choosing a different route than their usual one, with Ranger now positioned on the outside edge of the sidewalk like a living barrier between them and the street. She found herself replaying the incident in her mind. The man's approach, his retreat when confronted with Ranger's protective stance, the officer's concerned response. It all painted a picture she didn't want to contemplate. Ethan, for his part, seemed untroubled by the event. He babbled, happily from his stroller, occasionally reaching out to pat Ranger's side when the dog walked close enough. The German Shepherd maintained his vigilant demeanor throughout the walk home, his head turning at every sound, his eyes scanning each cross street as they approached. Only when they were safely inside the house, doors locked behind them, did Ranger's posture finally relax. Even then, he positioned himself near the front window, amber eyes tracking the movement of each passing car with careful attention. You knew, didn't you? Martha murmured to him, stroking his head as Ethan played contentedly with blocks on the living room rug. You knew he meant harm. Ranger leaned slightly into her touch, his gaze momentarily meeting hers with an intelligence that still sometimes startled her. Then he turned back to the window, resuming his self-appointed watch. Martha called Ellie from the kitchen, keeping her voice low so as not to alarm Ethan. She explained what had happened at the park, trying to present the facts without causing undue panic, but also without minimizing the potential seriousness of the situation. Oh my God, Mom. Ellie's voice was tight with controlled fear. I'm coming to get you both right now. We're fine, sweetheart, Martha assured her. We're home, doors locked, and Officer Davis is increasing patrols in the area, and we have Ranger. There was a pause on the line. Yes, Ellie said. Finally, her tone softening slightly. You do have Ranger. Thank God for that. After ending the call, Martha returned to the living room to find a scene of perfect domestic tranquility. Ethan had abandoned his blocks and was now curled against Ranger's side, his small hand resting on the dog's fur as he looked through a picture book. Ranger remained alert, his ears occasionally swiveling towards sounds from outside, but his body formed a protective curve around the toddler. Looking at them together, the child and the dog, each finding comfort in the other's presence, Martha felt a wave of emotion that was difficult to name. Gratitude, certainly, for Ranger's protective instincts today. Relief that they had all returned home safely. But there was something else, too. A growing certainty that the connection between Ethan and Ranger went beyond ordinary bonds between children and pets. 3 weeks ago, she had impulsively offered to take in a traumatized dog, telling herself and others that it was temporary, just until he recovered, just until they found him a proper home. Now, watching Ranger guard Ethan with such devoted attention, she couldn't imagine separating them. Whatever proper home might exist for Ranger, it was clear to Martha that he had already found it. He wasn't just a pet they had rescued. He was a guardian who had claimed them as his own. The incident at the park changed things in subtle but significant ways. Martha altered their daily routines, varying their walking times and routes as Officer Davis had suggested. Ellie became more vigilant, checking in more frequently and occasionally driving past the house during her lunch breaks just to reassure herself that all was well. And Ranger, already protective, seemed to embrace his role as guardian with renewed purpose. 2 weeks passed without further sightings of the suspicious man. November deepened toward Thanksgiving, bringing shorter days and the first dusting of snow to Maplewood streets. Martha began preparations for the holiday, planning the small family gathering that would include Ellie, Ethan, and Ellie's brother Michael, who would drive up from Boston with his wife Lisa. "What about Ranger?" Ellie asked during one of their planning conversations. "Will he be okay with more people in the house? Michael and Lisa haven't met him yet." It was a valid concern. Despite Ranger's remarkable adjustment to Martha and Ethan, he remained reserved around other adults, including Ellie herself. He was never aggressive, but his body language made it clear that he preferred to maintain space between himself and unfamiliar humans. "We'll introduce them slowly," Martha decided. "And Ranger always has the workshop if he needs a quiet space, away from the commotion." As it turned out, they had an unexpected opportunity to gauge Ranger's reaction to visitors the very next day. Martha was in the kitchen preparing lunch when the doorbell rang, setting off Ranger's deep, resonant bark, a sound he reserved exclusively for potential intrusions into their territory. "It's all right, Ranger," Martha reassured him, making her way to the front door with the German Shepherd close at her heels. Ethan, who had been playing with wooden blocks in the living room, looked up with interest but remained where he was, seemingly unconcerned due to Ranger's proximity. Through the peephole, Martha could see Jake Sullivan shifting awkwardly on her front porch, a small paper bag in his hands. She smiled, surprised but pleased by his visit, and opened the door. "Jake, this is unexpected." The young man smiled somewhat sheepishly. "Hi, Mrs. Wilson. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I just wanted to check how you and the little guy are doing. And Ranger, of course." His gaze moved to the German Shepherd, who stood at attention beside Martha, neither welcoming nor threatening, simply assessing. "That's very thoughtful of you. Please come in." Martha stepped aside, giving Ranger a gentle command to back up and make space. The dog complied, though he maintained his watchful posture. Jake entered, wiping his feet carefully on the welcome mat. "I brought some of those almond cookies you mentioned liking from the market bakery," he said, extending the paper bag. "Just as a thank you, really, for letting me know how Ranger's been doing." Martha accepted the gift with genuine appreciation. Jake had checked in several times since the rescue, showing a surprising investment in Ranger's recovery. "That's so kind, Jake. We were just about to have lunch. Would you like to join us? Nothing fancy, just soup and sandwiches." "Oh, I don't want to impose." "Nonsense. It's the least I can do. After you helped save Ranger's life." Martha led the way to the kitchen, gesturing for Jake to follow. "Ethan will be happy to see you too." At the mention of Ethan, Ranger moved ahead of them, returning to the living room where the toddler was, still playing. The dog's behavior around Jake was noticeably different than it had been with the stranger in the park, alert but not defensive, maintaining awareness without showing signs of distrust. "He looks amazing," Jake commented as they entered the living room. "You'd hardly know what he went through, except for those marks on his neck." Ethan looked up at the new voice, his face lighting with recognition. "Ache," he exclaimed, his approximation of Jake's name, one of the many words he'd added to his growing vocabulary in recent weeks. Jake knelt down to the toddler's level, maintaining a respectful distance. "Hey there, buddy, remember me? I see you're taking good care of Ranger." As if understanding he was being discussed, Ranger moved to sit beside Ethan, allowing the child to lean against his side in what had become their customary position. "He's come so far," Martha agreed, watching the pair with fond eyes. "Dr. Mercer says he's made a remarkable recovery physically and behaviorally. Well, he's not without his quirks, but he's settled in beautifully." Jake nodded, his expression thoughtful as he observed the bond between child and dog. It's almost like it was meant to be, you know? Like Ethan knew something we didn't that day. The observation echoed Martha's own thoughts so closely that she felt a small shiver of recognition. I've wondered that myself, she admitted. The way Ethan insisted on checking the alley, how focused he was on Ranger even before we knew he was there. Sometimes I think children perceive things that adults have forgotten how to see. They moved to the kitchen, where Martha prepared lunch, while Jake sat at the table, sharing news from the market and the neighborhood. Ranger and Ethan remained in the living room, visible through the open doorway. Every few minutes, Ranger would glance toward the kitchen, checking on Martha's position and assessing Jake's continued presence. Have they found who did that to him? Jake asked suddenly, his voice lowered despite the distance between them and Ethan. The police, I mean. Any leads? Martha shook her head, a familiar heaviness settling in her chest at the question. Nothing concrete. Officer Davis said they're keeping an eye out, but without witnesses or clear evidence. She let the sentence trail off, unwilling to complete. The frustrating reality that whoever had tried to end Ranger's life would likely never face consequences for their cruelty. Jake's expression darkened. It makes me sick thinking about it. Who could do something like that to an animal? And in our town, you know? It just seems so out of place for Maplewood. I try not to dwell on it, Martha admitted, setting a bowl of tomato soup and half a grilled cheese sandwich in front of him. For Ranger's sake and for my own peace of mind. Whatever happened before, he's safe now. That's what matters. They ate lunch in companionable conversation, with Jake sharing stories about college and his plans after graduation. Martha found herself enjoying his company. There was something refreshing about his youthful enthusiasm, tempered with a kindness that seemed increasingly rare in the modern world. After lunch, as Jake prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. Mrs. Wilson, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Martha tilted her head, curious at his suddenly serious tone. Yes, Jake. I was wondering, I know Ranger is doing great with you and Ethan, but if you ever decide you can't keep him for some reason, would you consider letting me know first, before he goes to a shelter or anything? The question took Martha by surprise. You'd want to take Ranger? Jake nodded, a flush rising on his cheeks. I've been thinking about it since that day we found him. I'm in my last year at community college, and I've got that apartment over my uncle's garage. It's not huge, but there's a fenced yard, and I've always wanted a dog. He glanced toward the living room, where Ranger remained beside Ethan. I know he's probably best off here with you guys, the way he's bonded with Ethan especially. But if anything ever changed, Martha was touched by the offer, seeing in Jake's expression a genuine concern for Ranger's well-being, rather than a casual interest in acquiring a pet. That's very thoughtful, Jake. I'll certainly keep it in mind, though I have to admit I can't imagine our home without him now. Jake smiled, seemingly relieved to have made the offer regardless of the outcome. I figured as much. But the offer stands any time. After he left, Martha returned to the living room to find Ethan had fallen asleep against Ranger's side, his small features peaceful in slumber. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, as if aware of the precious weight leaning against him and determined not to disturb it. You've made quite an impression, haven't you? Martha murmured, sitting beside them on the carpet. On all of us. Ranger's eyes met hers, and Martha was struck again by the depth of intelligence they contained. Not for the first time, she wondered what experiences had shaped him before they found him in that alley. What kind of life he had led, what kind of person had decided he was disposable enough to be left for dead. Had he been loved once? Had he known kindness before cruelty? These questions had no answers, of course. Ranger's past was a closed book, the pages sealed by his inability to communicate his experiences in ways humans could understand. What mattered was the present, the remarkable bond he had formed with Ethan, the sense of security he had brought to their home, the quiet dignity with which he had overcome his trauma. And perhaps, Martha reflected, there was something to be learned from that, the ability to move forward without being defined by past suffering, the capacity to trust again after betrayal, the courage to form new connections when old ones had been severed in the most brutal way. The days leading up to Thanksgiving passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Michael and Lisa arrived on Wednesday evening, their car laden with overnight bags and contributions to the holiday meal. Martha had prepared them for Ranger's presence, emphasizing his protective nature around Ethan and his tendency to keep distance from unfamiliar adults. "Just let him approach you in his own time," she advised as they settled into the guest room. "Don't try to pet him or make sudden movements around him, especially when Ethan is nearby." Michael, who had inherited their father's practical nature, nodded his understanding. "We'll follow his lead, right, Lisa?" Lisa, a pediatric nurse with a natural affinity for all living creatures, smiled. "Of course, the last thing we want is to stress him after everything he's been through." Their considerate approach paid off. While Ranger maintained his vigilant watch over Ethan, he showed no signs of distress at the additional people in the house. By Thanksgiving morning, he had progressed to accepting treats from Lisa's hand and allowing Michael to sit on the same couch, though still with a respectful distance between them. The holiday itself unfolded with the comfortable rhythm of family traditions. The kitchen filled with savory aromas as the turkey roasted. Ellie arrived mid-morning with Ethan's favorite toy and a sweet potato casserole. Michael and Lisa set the dining room table with Martha's good china, the pieces carefully preserved from her own mother's collection. Ranger observed these activities with quiet attention, never far from Ethan, but gradually relaxing his guard as the day progressed. By the time they gathered around the table for the meal, he had settled into his bed in the corner of the dining room, positioned so he could keep Ethan in his sightline while remaining out of the way of the human celebration. "Before we eat," Martha said as they all took their seats, "I'd like to say something." She looked around the table at the faces of her family, Michael and Lisa, Ellie, little Ethan in his booster seat, and felt a swell of gratitude so intense it momentarily took her breath away. This year has brought unexpected changes to our lives, some challenging, some surprising, all meaningful. Her gaze drifted to Ranger, who watched her with those intelligent amber eyes. "I'm thankful for each of you, for the love and support we share. And I'm thankful for the reminder that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unlikely circumstances." Ellie reached over to squeeze her hand, understanding without need for elaboration. Michael raised his glass in silent agreement, and Ethan, with the perfect timing of a child oblivious to emotional moments, called out, "Ranger!" with such enthusiasm that everyone laughed, the solemnity of the moment dissolving into affectionate amusement. The meal progressed with the comfortable conversation of a family at ease with one another. Stories were shared, memories revisited, plans for the upcoming Christmas holiday tentatively formed. It was, by any measure, a perfect Thanksgiving, the kind that would be remembered in years to come, not for any dramatic event, but for the simple pleasure of being together. Later, as the evening wound down and dishes were cleared, they gathered in the living room. Michael built a fire in the hearth, while Lisa helped Ethan with a simple puzzle on the coffee table. Ellie and Martha brought in coffee and slices of pumpkin pie, the final indulgence of a day filled with abundance. It was in this moment of contentment that the doorbell rang. Its chime cutting through the peaceful atmosphere with jarring abruptness. Ranger was on his feet instantly, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert in a heartbeat. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not the standard alert bark he gave for most visitors, but something deeper, more primal. "Are we expecting anyone?" Ellie asked, setting down her coffee cup with a frown. Martha shook her head, already rising to her feet. "No, everyone I invited is here." "I'll get it," Michael offered, moving toward the entryway. But Ranger was faster, positioning himself between Michael and the door, his hackles raised and his growl intensifying. Ethan, sensing the shift in atmosphere, looked up from his puzzle, with wide eyes. "Ranger, what's wrong?" Martha moved toward the dog, concerned by this uncharacteristic display of aggression. In all the weeks they'd had him, Ranger had never behaved this way. Alert, yes, protective, certainly, but never with this level of obvious threat response. Through the front window, Martha caught a glimpse of a figure on the porch. A man, in a dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. It was him, the man from the park, the one who had approached them with such menacing intent, the one Ranger had warned away. "Call 911, she said to Michael, her voice low but urgent. "Now! It's the man Officer Davis warned us about." Michael didn't question her, immediately reaching for his phone. Lisa gathered Ethan into her arms, moving away from the windows toward the back of the house. Ellie joined Martha, peering cautiously. Through the curtain. "It's him, isn't it?" she whispered, having heard the full story of the park incident. "The one who was watching Ethan." Martha nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Ranger's growl deepened, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Police are on their way," Michael reported, rejoining them. "They said to stay inside, don't open the door, and keep away from the windows." But even as he spoke, they heard a new sound, the scrape of metal against metal, as if someone were tampering with the lock. Martha felt a cold rush of fear. The man wasn't just visiting, he was trying to break in. Ranger's response was immediate and decisive. He charged toward the door, his bark now a full-throated roar of protective fury. There was a startled curse from the porch, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. Michael moved to the window, careful to stay to the side of the frame. "He's running, headed toward that black sedan parked down the street." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing steadily closer. Ellie held Ethan close, murmuring reassurances, even as her own face reflected fear. Lisa joined Michael at the window, the two of them watching for any sign of the man's return, and Martha knelt beside Ranger, who had returned to a vigilant position near the door, his entire body tense with readiness. "Good boy," she whispered, her hand trembling slightly as she stroked his fur. "Good, brave boy." The arrival of police. Cars, their lights flashing blue and red against the evening darkness, brought a measure of relief. Officer Davis was among the first to approach the house, his expression grim as Martha recounted what had happened. "We got a partial plate from another neighbor who noticed the suspicious vehicle," he informed them, "and we have a decent description. Now, thanks to your brother's observation, this matches incidents in 2 other towns. We believe he's been targeting homes with young children looking for opportunities." The implication hung in the air, too terrible to voice aloud in Ethan's presence, though the adults exchanged glances that conveyed their understanding. This wasn't a random break-in attempt. This was something far more sinister. "We'll have patrols in the area all night," Officer Davis assured them. "And I'd like to station an officer outside your home, just as a precaution." Martha nodded gratefully, still shaken, but determined to maintain calm for Ethan's sake. "Thank you, officer. We appreciate that." As the initial crisis response settled into a more measured investigation, with officers taking detailed statements and examining the front door for signs of tampering, The family regrouped in the living room. Ethan, mercifully, seemed more curious than frightened by all the commotion, especially with Ranger now back at his side, calm but watchful. "I think I should stay here tonight," Ellie decided, her arms still wrapped protectively around her son. "I don't want to go back to our place alone, not after this." "Of course," Martha agreed immediately. "Michael and Lisa are in the guest room, but you and Ethan can take my room. I'll sleep on the sofa." "Mom, no, I can't kick you out of your bed. It's settled," Martha insisted with the gentle firmness that had ended countless childhood arguments. "I'll be perfectly comfortable, and I'll have Ranger with me." Later, after the police had completed their investigation and set up their watch, after Ethan had been bathed and tucked into bed with extra stories and reassurances, after Michael and Lisa had retired to the guest room with promises to help sort everything out in the morning, Martha found herself alone in the living room with Ranger and Ellie. "I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if Ranger hadn't been here," Ellie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "If he hadn't sensed the danger, if he hadn't scared that man away." Martha reached over to clasp her daughter's hand. "But he was here. He did protect us. And now the police have a description, a partial plate. They'll find him, Ellie." Ellie nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "When you first brought Ranger home, I was so worried. A traumatized dog, Ethan so young, all the potential risks. I thought you were being impulsive." "I was," Martha admitted with a small smile. "Completely impulsive. It wasn't logical or practical at all. But you were right," Ellie continued, her gaze moving to Ranger, who lay alert but relaxed at their feet. "I've never seen anything like the connection he has with Ethan. And now this, it's like he was meant to find us. Or we were meant to find him." The observation echoed Jake's words from days earlier, and Martha felt that same sense of recognition, of a truth that couldn't be easily explained, but nevertheless felt undeniably right. "I believe that too," she said simply. After Ellie had gone upstairs to join Ethan, Martha prepared her makeshift bed on the sofa, arranging pillows and blankets into a reasonable approximation of comfort. Ranger watched these preparations with interest, his head tilted slightly as if trying to understand this deviation from normal routines. "It's just for tonight," Martha told him, patting the space beside the sofa. "You can stay right here." To her surprise, once she had settled under the blankets, Ranger didn't take the indicated spot on the floor. Instead, he jumped lightly onto the sofa, careful not to land on her legs, and curled into the limited space at her feet. The weight of him was reassuring, solid and warm in the darkness of the living room. "This works too," Martha murmured, reaching down to stroke his fur. "Thank you, Ranger, for everything." As she drifted towards sleep, Martha found herself reflecting on the strange path that had led them here. A routine walk disrupted by a toddler's insistence, a horrific discovery in an alleyway, a split-second decision to take in a traumatized animal. And now this, a family protected, a predator thwarted, a bond formed that transcended ordinary understanding. There were no coincidences, Martha decided as sleep began to claim her. There was only the mysterious interweaving of lives, the unseen connections that bring the right souls together at exactly the moment they need each other most. Ethan had somehow known, that day in October, that Ranger needed them. What no one could have predicted was how profoundly they would come to need him in return. Outside, an officer kept watch from his patrol car. Upstairs, a family slept in the security of their shared vigilance. And here, in the quiet darkness of the living room, a woman and a dog who had saved each other in ways neither could have imagined found peace in the simple certainty of presence, the unbreakable bond between souls that recognize, against all odds and explanations, that they belong together. It wasn't the Thanksgiving any of them had planned, but as Martha finally surrendered to sleep, Ranger's steady breathing a comforting rhythm in the darkness, she found herself filled with a gratitude deeper than any she had known before, for second chances, for unlikely guardians, and for the mysterious wisdom of a child who had somehow known exactly where to look for a miracle disguised as an ordinary German shepherd. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Martha, Ethan, and Ranger has touched your heart. The bond between humans and animals can be truly miraculous, reminding us that sometimes our greatest protectors come into our lives when we least expect them. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the profound connections that shape our lives. Find it by clicking to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video if Martha and Ranger's story moved you. Every day, we bring unique narratives that delve into life's complexity and unexpected beauty. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section below.